From sizing up the federal budget and its Alberta impact to a defection from the ranks of the federal Conservatives and contention over funding for the chief electoral officer. Time now for tonight's politics panel. And joining us this evening, former MLA Karen McPherson and Chris Spearman, former mayor of Lethbridge. Good evening to you both. And let's begin on reaction to the federal budget. Here's an early response from Alberta's finance minister.
They don't reference, a bitumen pipeline to the West Coast specifically. So there's some clarity needed there. I'd say also they reference things like not needing an emissions cap, but we're going to need to understand how they'll tangibly get there.
Now, of note where the energy sector is concerned, tax credit commitments, including the extension of full credit rates for carbon capture, utilization and storage, as well as a clean electricity tax credit there. Now, Karen, before we get to Alberta reaction, how challenged do you think the government will be in selling this budget to Canadians?
There's a lot of differing issues and pressures that they need to deal with in the budget. And it's going to take finesse to be able to navigate those waters successfully. I think the real, where the rubber really hits the road is going to be in the House of Commons. They're short 2 votes right now, and we'll have to wait and see, depending on how they're able to sell the budget, what that vote looks like in the House of Commons. It wasn't a budget that was meant to placate people in advance of another election. It's really a down to business kind of budget. So I don't think they're thinking they're going to lose the vote. I think they feel pretty confident.
Well, Chris, a lot of reference by the government to generational and transformational investment. Do you think that means Canadians will need a generation for the impact to be felt? What's your read?
Yeah, I think the government is trying to lower expectations. The election created high expectations on both sides. Parties were, all sides. Parties were promising that things would be much better if they were in government, and now that they are in government, the reality has hit the road. It's much more difficult to do things. The political situation has changed since the April election. The intensity of the issues with Trump have really gotten worse rather than better in terms of the environment, and the government has to negotiate through all of that and deal in practically in terms of its spending going forward.
Karen, with the apparent scrapping of the emissions cap, how much of a nod do you see that being to long-standing demands from the Smith government? Is there enough here to warrant cautious optimism in this province?
I think so, and I think we're going to be more clear about that after the Grey Cup dated second wave of infrastructure investment projects and what that's going to look like. It's a hopeful measure. I don't think the Carney government is looking to totally acquiesce to everything the Smith government is demanding, but this seems like an olive branch for sure.
Chris, with $280 billion earmarked over 5 years for capital investment, some of which will target local infrastructure projects, how do you see this budget going over with municipalities and with the business community in Alberta?
Well, I think good things are happening. I saw in Lethbridge a business group getting together and looking forward to a $300 million project. And that money, the cities could apply for infrastructure support to ensure projects like that go forward. I think we have to be careful. In the past, the Alberta government has said no municipality can get money from the federal government without permission from the provincial government. And perhaps the money might have to go through the provincial government. That in itself might create red tape and might put Alberta municipalities at a disadvantage.
All right, to pick up on one of Karen's points a moment ago, the Carney government will need help in getting this budget across the finish line. Some of that help has already arrived with a Conservative MP crossing the floor to sit with the Liberals.
In my case, as a Nova Scotian, we're always trying to find ways to work together to solve the issues that are important to our communities, and I didn't see it by sitting in the opposition.
MP Chris Spearman joining the Prime Minister this morning ahead of his introduction to the federal Liberal caucus. The move puts the government 2 seats shy now of a majority and being able to pass the budget without opposition support. Chris, surprised to see a floor crossing? on the day of budget delivery? What's your read on signals being sent here, whether it's where the Liberals are concerned or the Conservatives?
Well, I think floor crossings have been rumored for some time, that the Liberals were hoping to approach some of the more progressive Conservatives and entice them to join the Liberals. I believe that's still in the works. The number I initially heard was about 6 that they were approaching. So we'll see if there are people. Some news came out today that Mr. d'Entremont was very unhappy with Mr. Poilievre's leadership style, and I think that's not uncommon in the Conservative caucus.
Karen, how big of a blow is this for the Conservatives, especially with Pierre Poilievre facing a leadership review? That happens in Calgary in January.
Yeah, I think based on what we're hearing from Conservative spokespeople in the media last night and this morning, they're very upset. They're saying very unkind things about Mr. d'Entremont. And it is really in the face of the spirit of floor crossings. This wasn't a huge migration of a third of the party going over to the other side. It was one MP who spoke to his constituents, spoke to his inner circle, and made a choice of conscience. And I think we can all respect that. And the CBC really needs to pay attention. Poilievre really needs to pay attention if he's got that amount of dissatisfaction, as rumored, in his caucus. His odds don't look great for a leadership review.
Chris, Liberals still need at least 2 more votes to get the budget passed, regardless of whether or not there might be others waiting in the wing to cross the floor. Could it be, though, that the opposition ends up forcing an election?
It could be. Elections are expensive. We were just in an election, 5 months ago? Do people want to go back to an election? My sense of it, Canadians don't want to have another election, and I believe Canadians want to see this government get a fair chance to govern, and they would be upset if the opposition forced an election at this stage.
Karen, is an early election what Canadians want?
No, especially in Alberta. We've just had 2 elections this year. We've had municipal and federal, and they're tired. People are tired. I think Canadians generally have a bit of election fatigue just because we seem to have them so often. And no, I don't think Canadians or Albertans want that right now.
All right, time for us to take a bit of a break. But when we come back, the provincial government's response to contention over funding for the chief electoral officer. More from our politics panel in a moment. Welcome back. Alberta's finance minister is defending a decision to limit funding to the chief electoral officer for dealing with citizen-led initiatives.
I think they're speculating on the number of petitions that are coming forward. Since they haven't come yet, I don't see the need for any further funding until those applications come in and the costs of dealing with them is actually incurred.
2 UCP MLAs are facing recall petitions, Dimitrios Nicolaides and Angela Pitt. There are also 2 referendum initiatives, the Forever Canadian campaign and another aimed at prohibiting public funding of private schools. Alberta's chief electoral officer had requested an additional $13.5 million in funding for staff and resources to verify petitions. However, a legislative committee with a UCP majority decided this week to provide about $1.5 million. Karen, I'll start with you first this time. As a former MLA, what's your takeaway from how this legislative committee responded to the funding request from the chief electoral officer?
A lot of what happens in committee is at the suggestion of a centralized power structure like the Premier's office. And there must have been some reason for the Premier's office to believe that this was the right move. It really seems at odds with a government that wanted to be seen as strengthening democracy through petitions and through recall legislation, to then turn around and say, oh, well, no, we don't want to fund that. I think at this point it's kind of wait and see, but overall the optics are very, very poor.
Chris, what do you make of how the government is responding to this funding request, especially in the wake of the Alberta Next town halls held across the province to generate feedback on referendum questions? Yeah,
I think the phrase follow the money is appropriate here. when the money's not provided and the process can't move forward efficiently, it tells you that the government doesn't really support what they said they supported. I think a lot of Albertans are questioning now basically the truthfulness of the government and the credibility. So they seem determined to slow down any form of accountability to Albertans.
Karen, with building pressure over petitions, any chance the government would consider further amendments to the Recall Act, maybe even removing it?
I think based on how these tools have been used so far, it's not a really good look for the government, though I wouldn't be surprised if there were amendments introduced to how they're being implemented, how they can be used. I don't think they expected people to have such a strong reaction, especially to Bill 2, especially to removing the constitutional rights of teachers in a scope that's much wider than was necessary to solve the strike. And this is how people are utilizing the tools that this government put in place.
Chris, in terms of Albertans utilizing the tools, a lot of these petitions so far target the government and UCP MLAs. But do you see the day when UCP supporters start targeting NDP MLAs with recall petitions?
That might be a political response. I can't rule that out for sure. If recalls are seen to be effective, that could go forward. I think your first question to Karen was, could you see recall legislation dismantled? This isn't the first time we've had recall legislation. It was done in the 1930s, and when Albertans began to use it, the recall legislation was discontinued.
Chris, is there enough push there, though, to push the Smith government into such a move?
If the government feels cornered, I wouldn't be surprised to see them, just lowering the funding to administer this tells you they're not really encouraging it to go forward.
Okay, so Karen, what message do you think then the Smith government needs to take away if it is that more of these recall petitions continue to pile up?
Well, I think it's a pretty clear signal that the people of Alberta don't feel like the government is listening to what's really important to them. They didn't avail themselves of any other tools in order to solve the teacher strike. People are very dissatisfied that their MLAs have not spoken up in objection to that measure, and that they continue to toe the party line. And I think that's what these petitions really demonstrate, these recall notices, is that you're not paying attention to us, to what's important to us. And I think the government would be wise to pay attention to that.
Chris, is this flurry of petitions right now, is this just something in the here and now, or is there some some staying power to go with it? Do we expect more petitions to keep on coming?
Well, I would see if the petitions are successful, so the Forever Canadian one was an outstanding success. If some of these recall petitions are successful, that's going to spur others, whether they be, to recall government MLAs or recall NDP MLAs. We'll see, but if it seemed to be a successful process, people will avail themselves of it.
What do you think about that, Karen? Will there be more, or is this a flash in the pan? People get it out of their systems now, and they will move on with their lives.
No, there really seems to be momentum building, especially if you pay attention to what's happening on social media. People are getting very well organized in terms of how to be successful in getting your recall motion certified to be able to go forward. There's one that's already starting to collect signatures. This is really important to people because they feel like 2027 and the next election is a long way off, and they want to have a say, they want to have it now, and they don't feel listened to by the current government.
All right. We'll have to leave it there. Great to see you both. Thank you for this.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a great day.